Okay, folks, it says recording, and as you see, the background is gone. Not going to play with that foolishness anymore. Every time I move my arm, something bad popped up. It didn't look good. So you have my office, and it's a little messy now. There's a box down over there. Whoop, over there. There it is, there, right there. And, books are on the floor. We've been tearing things apart. But um, dog just opened the door. I'm going to close it again. Just to keep things like the classroom, a little bit of interruption, people walk in late, that kind of thing. It happens. Today's festivities, well, I might have made tonight's. I don't know when you're going to be watching this. I'm actually recording at about 7 o'clock at night. So, we left you with the changes in Europe and the pre-industrial conditions that gave rise to the Industrial Revolution. And we left you with 8 of those. And then we went on to some specifics. Some 4 of those were specific to Great Britain. And among them was Britain had the most stable government, political scene at the time. It had the most, if you will, liberal political scene at the time. It had a parliament. Its monarchy was weak. It was drifting away from mercantilism. It was into capitalism, and the merchant class had become part of the government, and they were making laws to protect their business. It had a centralized banking system with private banks and cheap, what do you call it? Cheap interest rates. And they had available people coming off the farm, many of them skilled, and some of them just laborers, but they had plenty of them. Okay, and it had a strong position in empire. American colonies are one, West Indies, India, Egypt, all those things. Now, just to leave you, and had the innovative culture, I forgot that one. People accepted innovation. People said, if they can do it, I can do it. And mobility was real to them. Unlike when it was a much more rigid class system in a monarchy. Royalty, peasants. How do you develop that class? And most of Europe had reverted. Any advances were suppressed. The monarchs in France and Russia and the Austrian Empire and Spain had all gotten together and said, time out. We're weakening here. We don't like it. And they became quite repressive and absolute and took steps to maintain their control of everything, including the economy through mercantilism. Now, just to keep you alert, there's other things happening during this period of time. And we're talking we're talking about 100 years. We're talking about 1780 to 1760, 1780 to 1850 for the entire Industrial Revolution. So just so you don't think the only thing that's happening is the Industrial Revolution that we've been talking about, here you go. 9 pins bowling was played for the first time. I don't know why it's 9 pins and not 10 pins. But anyway, 9 pins played for the first time in New York City. 1733, James Oglethorpe was given a charter to establish the colony of Georgia. In other words, America colonies were still developing during part of this time, leading up to it anyway. The American Revolution, 1775 to 1783. The Industrial Revolution had started. In particular, it had started in Great Britain. America's behind. We're not even America yet. We're not even the United States yet. George Washington, 1789, 9 years into the Industrial Revolution, is inaugurated as the first president, and the first Congress meets in New York City. Then we have the development, and these developments are going to foreshadow we're going to talk about tonight. Well, one of them is anyway. 1807 was the first famous Ascot horse race. 1808, iron anchor chains for ships get a patent in the name of Captain S. Brown. So these kind of developments were occurring. One other little thing that England did, they foresaw what was coming. The merchants were pushing for innovation. And in 1731, English factory workers, and boy, was this rudimentary factory at this point, water factory, waterworks, water power, were prohibited from emigrating to America. Why? They would take knowledge of the technology. They didn't want Americans to have it. They did not want Americans to compete. Keep that in mind, because later they also prohibited the export of any technology or publication of any factory information, any plans for machinery. Couldn't publish it, couldn't talk about it, couldn't take it out of the country. They were protecting the industry. Remember, merchants were in Parliament at the time. So what changed it all? What got this thing really going? Well, the first thing is cotton. And we're going to just trace it through cotton. And I say it's the first thing. Some historian would argue with me, but if we're tracing something, how do we figure out where to start? I'm going to start with cotton. It's one example of an innovation that drove many other innovations. And you'll get the gist as we go through it. So here it is. Now, it's not like cotton. Cotton was at one time a cloth that was extremely labor intensive. It was difficult to do. It was slow, and it was expensive. In England at the time, this is the 1730s, it was indeed about 11 shillings per pound. Now, I couldn't tell you what today's value of a shilling is, since they don't use it anymore. Well, they're back on it. They dropped the euro, and it's all very confusing. They use the British pound now. And at one time, even in my lifetime, the British pound was worth about $2. Today, it's about even, pound for dollar. You might look it up on the exchange rates. Let's see if it's holding steady. All right. But the key point of that 11 shillings is cotton was not for the masses. They couldn't afford it. So only the richer merchants and the royalty could afford it. And why do they want to afford it? Come on. It was breathable. It was soft. It was easily cleaned, unlike wool. It was light, unlike wool. And in layers, it was warm. So there you go. It was a very valuable cloth. And certainly it was in demand. Now, in 1735, Great Britain had ample cotton. It was getting its cotton from Egypt, India, the West Indies, and the American colonies, particularly the South, where it could grow and where slave labor, which was labor intensive, could handle and produce relatively large amounts. Now, you'll see it was a very small amount compared to what later could be done. through the innovations. But here we go. So it was handwork. Here's what you had to do. You first had to pick it, which was back-breaking, nasty, dirty work, bugs and dust, and you pick the bowl, and it's also cutting work because the cotton plants are not friendly. And so it was tough work. You had to pick it. Pardon me. Then you had to separate the seeds from the bowl. The bowl's called the cotton. So kind of a, I don't know, it might be a southern pronunciation of ball of cotton. But you had to separate the seeds. Then you had to card or comb it out because it's just this ball. Comb it out into long fibers because those fibers then had to be put onto a spinning wheel. And that spinning wheel had the way of turning the fibers and entwining them. So one fiber entwined. Boy, this is a good demonstration, isn't it? Entwined, and you had thread. You'd get enough of them. You had thread, usable thread. And out of usable thread, you then had to weave that usable thread one at a time into cloth. And once you had cloth, now you can start cutting it up and making clothes. So it was a laborious, time-consuming, long process. During the cottage industries, remember the cottage industries? The guy who came around giving people the raw materials and hiring them to go ahead and we spin it and weave it, was called a factor. Later, factory, get the connection. The factor would come around. He would give the raw materials to the workers for all or part of the process. And at the end, he'd collect it and he'd have these bolts of cloth to sell. But the relationship, obviously, between cotton production and slavery in the U.S. can't be overemphasized. As a matter of fact, the U.S. became and it wasn't the U.S., the colony, 13 colonies, actually the southern colonies, became the biggest supplier of cotton. But in 1733, John Kay patented the flying shuttle, it was called. What this shuttle did was allow the shuttle to kind of move, pushed through quickly, and you could go, all these threads were out like this, and you could shoot the shuttle through and over and under. And it would go, how's this? Fly through, and then back the other way, and then back the other way until you had jam it down until you had cloth. So it was a weaving thing. Now, this weaving thing, it's the end process. So you're still at the front end slow. On the other hand, this doubled the speed of a hand loom, where the person had to put it through, push a carriage, something to jam it together. You can't have this loose stuff. You want tight cotton cloth. It doubled the speed of hand looming, so it was a good advantage. Then in 1763, James Hargreaves, that's Hargreaves. James Hargreaves developed what's called spinning jenny. Now, the spinning jenny was a major change because now we're working on the thread, okay? And instead of one spinning wheel and one person doing it, you could use a crank and a movable loom on a crank carriage that would pack. And you could make, oh no, pardon me, not the carriage, just a movable, let's try that again. I'm not an engineer, guys. Hang on. nor am nor am I a mechanical historian, and some guys just love that stuff. But anyway, here you go. We're talking about spinning and not making the cloth, spinning the threads. Now, what it did, he could make 6 to 24 spools of thread all at once, all coming off. And as you twisted and twisted, it went around and around on the spools. Now, what this means, it was usable, strong thread for weaving, and that was another step up in the process. Now we have faster thread handed to the spinning jennies who make faster weaves. But we're still at the front end here. Now, Great Britain, I told you, had prohibited the export publication of any industrial plans or technology. A guy named Samuel Slater slipped into the US and rebuilt a cotton spinning machine from memory. So now the US is starting to think about it. But we're still only about 1769, 1770 when this happens. And at that time, 1769, Richard Arkwright develops a set of rollers that allows at least 100 spools to be made at once. Now, your text suggests that he may have pirated this, and I suggest he may have pirated it from a guy he knew that was working on something similar named Samuel Compton. Compton's an interesting fellow. Now, Arkwright's contribution made a coarse, strong thread. If you still wanted really good stuff, fine, soft, you had to wait for it to be shipped from India. And cloth the same way, shipped from India because of the cheap labor there. Many times, some of the cotton from the US went to Britain, then went to India. Well, they went to Britain because of the Navigation Acts, but we'll worry about that some other day. That's in a different, earlier course. All products from the colonies had to go through British ports first, then get shipped out. So it would go to India, get processed, and come back. Still cheaper, but still expensive, but growing in popularity, I should say, not cheaper. So we're still relying on that Indian not only weaving, but thread making and weaving for the really good stuff. A guy named Samuel Compton begins developing a hybrid jenny and a moving carriage like Arkwright's machine. Arkwright's machine was called the water frame, kind of a misnomer, but many of them became operated by water power, which we'll get to in a bit. And what Compton did was successfully make, he called it the mule, and he successfully made fine, strong thread that made it for a fine cloth, which means that we really not dependent on India anymore and driving the price down and making it more available. Compton was born into a family of tenant farmers and spinners. So he grew up spinning. He started spinning for the factors and later in a factory itself. And then when he was old enough, which I'm not sure of the age, I didn't check that, he began weaving. He became a weaver. This introduced him to all those machines, Arkwright's included. By the way, he also met Arkwright because Arkwright was a town barber in which Compton lived. Compton tried, and this is what I'd say, for 5 years in his free time, which he didn't have much of, and using his own money to develop his machine. And he tried to do it in secret. He was afraid of competition, stealing, and machine destroyers. Because at this time, the machines are putting some of the spinners and weavers out of work. They're called the Luddites. We'll talk about them more later. Luddites, Luddites, Luddites. Now, Compton, and I put Arkwright there, in quotes, did this relationship lead to Arkwright's innovations while Compton was working? We don't know. Compton, however, wasn't wise enough or rich enough to get good legal help, and he didn't patent his invention. Instead, he publicized it, he sold it, once it got out, many manufacturers said, we'd love to have this, we'll pay you for it. And once they got wind of it, and then they knew they're done, could find another one down the street, or they could find the plans anywhere and buy just a cheap set of plans. Poor old Compton rarely got paid. As a consequence, he rarely got paid. He didn't make much money. It was a boon to the world, and he didn't make anything out of it to speak of. As a matter of fact, in 1827, he died fairly penniless, being supported by contributions from local benefactors simply based on his name and what he'd done for the country. So, legal rights, get a patent. Now you have some good cotton production going on, but we're still at the back end. We get this stuff, and the demand is going up, and the price is coming down, but it's still hand planted, hand picked, hand separate the seeds, hand comb, nasty, long work. And of course, making slavery more profitable. Eli Whitney, or Mrs. Henrietta Whitney, or Catherine Green, what's arguments among historians as to who did it, really did it. But they solved the next big issue, and that's the separation of seeds from the boll so that thread can be made. And they did it with inventing a cotton gin. Now, the story is interesting because women couldn't contract, women couldn't own property. If you got married, your husband owned the property. But there is some evidence that Mrs. Henrietta Whitney designed the cotton gin, thought it up, and her husband got the patent, as you can understand. There's also some historical record that suggests that Catherine Green, who was married to General Greene of Revolutionary fame, and who had followed him throughout the Revolutionary War to the battles and witnessed many of the battles and provided assistance if she could to the troops, became a friend of Eli Whitney. And that she, if you will, encouraged him, partnered with him in designing this thing. But of course, as a woman, when it became time to patent it, Eli Whitney gets the patent. Which version is correct? Really lost in history. The debate is up there. But it's an interesting story. But the kicker is, yes, we solved the problem. We put teeth on a roller which turns with a crank and separates those seeds, and then the threads go through a comb, and the seeds are too big to go there, and we've separated them, and we have good, smooth, stretched cotton fibers out the other side. One person could produce 50 pounds of raw cotton a day out of the cotton gin. But this isn't solving the problem of factories. We now have machines. We have a cotton gin that gets us the fiber, and as fast as they can grow it and produce it, it goes to England, and England has just massive amounts of it, and England's producing it and driving down the price, I might add. But they are still doing it in small venues, if you will, small factories. And they have now the capacity with Compton's machine to get going. Big, big machines. So they need something to drive those machines. And that's where water power comes in. It was determined that by 1800 that if we built factories on rivers, we could have big water wheels connected to gears that turned loom after loom after loom after loom, or spinning jenny and spinning jenny, spinning jenny, spinning jenny, one after the other. And we could make massive amounts of cotton fiber first and then cotton cloth thereafter. And so really what's going on is we say we have to place these factories on not navigable, on water that's running fast enough to power these machines. And so this led to factories being put in, we'd call it kind of the hinterland, land that was considered less desirable, up on hillsides with elevation behind it, usually rocky in the Highlands in Scotland, for example, and other highland areas in England, usually much less desirable for living or pastures. And that way the water has some punch when it comes down to move the wheels. If it was a slow meandering water, it would just be going around and barely turning the wheel. So it had to have some punch for power. Now, no place in Great Britain is more than 50 miles from any navigable stream. So once you got it, all you had to do is get to a navigable stream and you could get it to the next part of the process or to the public, get it to the cities by water. By the way, this had led to canal building, a rush of canal building in England, to make sure that the rivers were connected. And by 1837, the United States started thinking seriously about canal building. And in 1837, we started the Erie Canal. The Erie Canal changed the face of America. It runs from the Great Lakes near Buffalo and ends in the Hudson River, which is a navigable river, and it runs down to New York Harbor. And it's what made New York City the biggest economic center in the world. It connected the Midwest, all the Midwest products could go to the Great Lakes from as far west as Wisconsin, Minnesota, the Dakotas, Nebraska. If they could get it to the Great Lakes, over, down, and out. So it was a boon to New York City. And the cost of transportation of goods from the Midwest to the East Coast, where the bigger cities were, Philadelphia, New York, Boston, dropped dramatically because before it was by teamsters, long oxen or horse-drawn carts with very little in them, but very expensive to run. Once you got on the canal, things that cost $100 a ton, $10. So this running water was out of the way. In other words, yeah, it was good running water, but it was also harder to get labor because it was out of the cities. It was up in where people really didn't want to be or live, which means it was farther from customers, farther from your access to your raw material, which is being imported into the harbors. And so it was farther away from government and, if you will, policing and safety and regulation. So it was inconvenient. So there was a constant pressure to keep looking, to keep looking. Moreover, rivers were inconsistent. Sometimes drier times, no rain for a long time, river flows slowed down, which slowed the wheel. Less power. Flooding in the winter overwhelmed the wheel and sometimes the factory itself. So the need for a stable power supply led to folks looking for steam. All right, give me a second here. Whoa, that didn't work. I had these. There we are. And no, I know I'm doing it wrong again. I am so sorry. There I am. There you go. No. Give me a second. I lost my file. Oh, okay. My fault again. Doggone it. That dummy. All right, here's Compton's Mule. And I'm going to put it over here. Up. Oh, I made that bigger. Okay. Share the screen. Here's Compton's Mule. Now I know, despite what it's telling me, you're looking at Compton's Mule. And you get the idea. Net share. Now it's shared. Now you're seeing it. You weren't seeing it before. It now tells me you are sharing your screen. Thank you. Okay, so there's Compton's Mule. And you can see this shuttle can move along the side and continually move and pack. And here's the spinner. Now you put all of these in a row and you get much more efficiency. All right. All right. I had others. And I want to do something else for you. Okay. Okay, now I figured it out. Here's Hargreaves Jenny. Note the number of, oh, whoops, got to share again. Sorry. Hargreaves Jenny, you see the number of spools that can be spun at once. You see the operator moving the crank, and the thread coming and going around onto spools. These were great innovations, folks. Now, solving the problem. The first mills, by the way, and don't I have those? The Lowell mills. All right, these need to be organized better. I am so sorry. All right. So the next move is steam. Now, look, the ancient Greeks had known when you boil water, you get steam, and they also knew that if things were filled with steam, they would rise. If they put steam things over it, they would rise. They also knew steam generated heat. But for them, the potential power was not visualized. It was more of a curiosity and was not developed into anything. That took a few centuries more. And the need for reliable power is what drove it. Now, in 1712, now we're well before the real precursors to the, what do you call it, the Industrial Revolution. But Tom Newcomen developed and patented an atmospheric engine. Now, really what it was just a steam container, metal, iron, that could drive a piston. But when it drove the piston, and it was mainly for a pump, when it drove the piston, you could only drove it one direction. You had to wait for it to cool and then pull it back. So it was more manual and very slow. It could move things, but it was very slow. In 1869, now, for a long time, you really don't see people using that technology that Newcomen really patented and developed. Your book mentions his partner, but Newcomen got the patent. In 1969, 1969? No. Yeah, I know. You can laugh. It's all right. I wish I could see you. This is the classroom would get a charge out of that. But anyway, let's get down to it. In 1769, just a few years before, James Watt discovered, and James Watt was a repair guy, a jack of all trades that took care of equipment. And what he noticed on the pumps that he was repairing, Newcomen's pumps, atmospheric engines, was that, hey, wait a minute. If we added a condenser to it, the water gets to circulate and it would cool. And if we added a flywheel to that goes around, the piston can go up, go around this way. The piston goes up and attached, it goes down, it gets pulled down, and then we get a general cycle. And if we get that general cycle, we can turn it on its side, make it go this way, or we can just go this way and hook it to other gears. And if we hook it to other gears, we can run a factory. So that he partnered with a guy named Bolton, and they made steam-powered coal-building engines a commercial success. Now, the only problem with this was containing the energy. Engines were made of wrought iron. Wrought iron was about all we have. Wrought iron is iron ore that's heated and pounded into sheets. and then you can form the sheets. And the problem with pounding anything is it's imprecise. You get different thicknesses. And when you bend it, you get different thicknesses in different places. And as a consequence of that, when too much pressure, it blew up, blew a hole, or really exploded once it cracked. And that made this steam use somewhat dangerous. So what do you need? You need a better material to contain this energy. Henry Cort in 1783 comes along and develops a process for molten iron using charcoal, which if you molt it, you pour it. And that made for a much more even surface for this mealable thing we call iron. But still not perfect, not perfect. Almost 70 years later, 1856, Henry Bessemer comes along, and he discovered if he preheats iron and adds carbon, it creates a harder, more flexible material than iron, than wrought iron, than molten, what do they call that? Poured iron. He created steel. More stronger and more flexible than iron. It gives us today stronger tools, cutlery, rails for railroads, material for steam engines. Steam engines get put on ships, railroad engines, mining equipment, which increased the depth in which miners could go and what they could extract from the earth. I mentioned this to students in a different class, and I can't see your faces. I don't know your ages yet. I don't even know the enrollment yet. But here's the deal. If I say steam shovel to you, does that mean anything? It doesn't to most students. But that's what the big shovels for mining were run by steam. And today, we run them with diesel or something else. But the steam shovel energized construction and mining and big projects. You want to dig a hole? Whack with a steam shovel and you've got a big hole very quickly. So the other thing it gave us was stronger spinning machinery. So once again, cotton is king, if you will. Cloth, we can make it faster now than ever. And it becomes part of the demand for the masses. What was 11 shillings a pound is now 1 shilling a pound. The masses can afford to dress in cotton. Now, production methods also. It didn't take folks long to say, if we can do this with cotton or any other product, why don't we work on our production methods? And it didn't take long to realize that if you own the raw materials and everything in between the processes and then the finished product, you could make a profit on all ends. And so that's today we call that vertical integration. It was new then. And one of the pioneers was a guy named Joshua Red. It's easy for you to say. Josiah Wedgwood. There we go. And if you've ever seen or know about or heard about Wedgwood china, it was very popular. The only Wedgwood I have is a pair of cufflinks, but which today at my age. I don't wear much anymore, but here you go. So Wedgwood pioneered, and I think I have, oh, I should say, I got one up here. He pioneered it in Great Britain. Earliest pioneers in the 13th century, Venice invented its arsenal. And really what the arsenal was a series of, and I have a picture for you. There it is. Series of, I see I'm getting better now. Come on, there we are. Series of docks where they built ships. And they could build parts in this one, parts in this one, and another, you'll see dry land over here. And what they did was build other parts. And let me get that up and I'll show you the rope area. I had it up, now I lost it. There it is. And share. Share two. This is the roping area. You'll see them making rope. And these are smaller ropes. They make big, heavy-duty ropes, and you see them in the corner. They are making ropes in one area, sails in another area, masts in another area, other rigging in another area, the hulls in another area. And with this system, they had at some times up to 5,000 workers. They were called arsenaletti, and were quite well paid and well respected citizens because it made Venice the world's power, just that little city, the world's power, world trading power, and it had a navy to protect it. And it was because they could build these ships. They could turn out a ship a day. Now, they weren't as big as, the Titanic or a ship that we would call today, but they were obviously for 1300 superior to anyone else's, and they had most of them. Key factor here is they're doing it in side by side, but in stages in different areas. That's manufacturing. Wedgwood took that same idea and he purchased quarries. He purchased quarries for the raw materials to make china plates, which is, in the clay stuff. And he made his factories efficient, repetitive, and standardized. And then he marketed through his own stores. And he had the attention, for some reason, because it was pretty stuff and quality stuff. He had the attention of royalty. And of course, royalty could afford it. And he had a whole bunch of his plates, dinnerware, glasses, vases, decorations, by appointment of the king. King had a lot of kids too. And so he was in business with royalty all the time. It gave me the modern store. Shoot. I'll get it for you next time. Show you a Wedgwood store. But he also marketed it through his own stores. Now, once he got by appointment of the king, he made cheaper knockoffs and sold them cheaper to other folks that looked a lot like what the king was eating off of. Very popular. And as a consequence, he became quite rich. So the change in production materials, the change to steam power, the invention of steel, all occurs in Britain. All tied to a push, emphasis given to it from cotton. The result, Great Britain's the leader in industry compared to any others. High standard of living for many. One cotton worker could produce what it took 20 to produce in previous years. The affordability and desirability and demand increased for the cotton, particularly the cotton from the US. Still wasn't the US, but life wasn't perfect, especially for factory workers. One historian described the life of factory workers as hell on earth. So the life of folks will be presented in the next presentation. We'll also take a look at why it takes 50 years. What are the reasons, some of the reasons behind it for the 50 years for the US after becoming independent to catch up. Now, I'm trying to keep these presentations at around 30 minutes. I didn't time this when it feels like it's a little long. If it is, I apologize. And I'll do that. I'll break them down into hopefully roughly 30 minutes. The last one was 32 minutes. Segments. We'll try to keep them there for you. I'll be putting up posts so that you can comment on these, ask me questions about these, tell me that I need to dance for you, what I need to do to make them better, and I'd appreciate it.